this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Did you know that parents rank teaching financial literacy as the toughest life skill? That's where Greenlight comes in, the debit card and money app made for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and track spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn how to earn, save, and spend responsibly, while parents have peace of mind, knowing smart money habits are being built with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/iHeart. That's greenlight.com/iHeart.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Being a New Orleans native, one of the things that I put a lot of stock in is fine food. You go a lot of places and, you measure that location by the cuisine they serve. I've been around a lot of chefs over the course of my life. The story I want to tell you today has to do with a man that spent nearly 50 years, not just working in the kitchen as a chef, but teaching others not just how to cook, but things like foraging for mushrooms, how to set a kitchen up, how to make a living with your hands, following those things that you really, really love. Today, I want to talk about the murder of Dan Brophy. Jackie Howard's with me, the executive producer of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. Jackie, what do we have relative to Dan Brophy and his life?
Dan Brophy was a beloved chef and instructor. His students spoke highly of him. He worked for the Oregon Culinary Institute in Southwest Portland. He had been there since 2006. Students came into the school early one morning and found Daniel Brophy dead, shot in the kitchen. Did not appear to be any forced entry. The assumption was made that it was a robbery or attempted robbery, but it took some time for police to come up with the idea of what they think actually happened. Daniel Brophy was married to a romance novelist, Nancy Crampton Brophy. One of the stories that she was credited with writing is called How to Murder Your Husband, and also The Wrong Husband. Police began their investigation in the kitchen. How do you start? Because you have a location where many people come in and out, and we all know you cordon off the scene and start there. But when you have something that does not appear to be a forced entry, Dan Brophy still had his wallet, his cell phones, and his car keys with him. What are the things that we're looking for?
Dan's practice, according to all of his colleagues, was to leave the house early in the morning. He'd head out for the culinary school, and sometimes arrive around 5:30. You imagine that. And one of the reasons is, I'm a college professor. It's I don't have to show up to do that sort of thing. This guy is a hands-on instructor. He has to make sure that everything is squared away in the kitchen. That all of the foodstuffs are laid out correctly, that they have all of the utensils that they're going to need that day for the instruction that's going to be ongoing. And it's a class set up, so it's labor intensive. It's remarkable what these guys go through. Very intense learning in this environment. So, when we think about that initial theme of 5:30 in the morning, you have to begin to think that if it didn't happen outside the building, which you would, think that if somebody's walking from their vehicle to the entrance, that there would be maybe an effort on the part of the victim initially to fight with the person. If they're being held at gunpoint, that they know that they're going to be killed or something like that. There's no evidence of that. And then there's no evidence that the lock was jimmied on the door. And here's another part to this, is that one of the things that Dan would do, in my opening, I talked about how he was a forager. Not only was he a forager, he was considered by some a master gardener. I don't even know what goes into that sort of thing, but he would grow herbs. And one of the things that we do know about these folks that teach in these culinary environments, you don't get paid a lot of money. So they would have side gigs that they would do. And one of the things that Dan would do is he would have a collection of homegrown herbs, and he would kind of bind these things together. I guess things like oregano and sage and all these sorts of things. And he would sell fresh herbs, and he would put them on a cart. It's like a hand cart. You see teachers using them lots of times. And that cart was actually in the hallway. He had all of his herbs set up out there, and even had his keys, resting on this cart, which gives you an indication that he was going about his normal process. So there's no evidence that someone walked in and kind of strong-armed him, where they're throwing a gun up in his face, and he's doing things that are outside of the norm. So as an investigator, when you show up in this environment, you have to begin to factor these things around. And sometimes the stuff doesn't come to light until afterwards. The cops have no way of knowing when they show up at the scene that his normal activity was to get this card out, put the herbs on it. Maybe he rested his keys there. Normally that comes after the fact, after you begin to interview people. So, immediately you're thinking, well, was this somebody that actually knew him that perpetrated this horrible crime?
As the police start to interview students who showed up for class that day, one of the things that police uncovered is the fact that the door was still locked. We talked about no forced entry, Joan. Right here is the classic telltale sign. The door was still locked. It was Dan Brophy's routine, as you're talking about, to unlock the door for the students as he prepared for the morning. So as they began to show up for class that morning on June 2nd, they knew something was wrong. The students waited for a long time, but it wasn't until another instructor let the classmates in that they found Brophy's body. They say he was lying on the floor by the sink, the water was running, and the lights were on. Students began to try to do CPR. They made the call to 911. So what does all this tell us, Joe, with the fact that the door was still locked? How did the perpetrator get away?
This goes to, I use that word, kind of normal, if you will. And that's a theme that you'll hear me talk about. I don't care if people get tired of hearing it or not. That's something that everyone will hear from me. And that's what makes death investigation so unique and also so horrible, is the fact that I'm not talking about us as investigators. I'm talking about people going about their normal day-to-day business, where they are always having to see the abnormal in the context of the normal. For them, for those students that walked in and found their instructor, this person that they sat at his feet to learn from, laying in this position, can you imagine everything that was going through their mind? They're trying to save their instructor's life at this point. They're doing chest compressions and everything, and he was gone by this time. So whoever had perpetrated this crime had done it in such a manner that there were no signs of life left in his body at that moment in time, because he wasn't transported from the scene. They worked this scene. And that's kind of a big tell for us in investigations. That means that when EMS might arrive, they know that there is no hope. So what does that imply? That implies that there is a specific marker in time that has gone out. That means no signs of even agonal respirations. You might even have changes after death. At that point, the body is growing cool to the touch. But the question, I think, is, how did this individual leave the premises without anybody being aware? How did the door kind of lock behind them, as they were exiting? Is there some way to manipulate that lock? And here's another big part to this. How would they have known to have locked that door unless they had intimate knowledge of not just Dan's activities, but the environment itself?
One of the students who found Dan Brophy began doing CPR, and she said that his chest felt squishy. Her words, squishy. She thought she had broken his ribs. Now, ultimately, we know that he was shot. So what would be the explanation for that feeling, Joe, squishy?
It can arise from a couple of different places. First off, you have the squishiness. If folks at home will just imagine a fluid-soaked sponge, if you've ever held a fluid-soaked sponge, whether it's a bath sponge or, one that you keep on the sink when you're washing dishes, the consistency of that, it's wet. And when you compress it, it has kind of a squishiness to it. And that would mean that the area was potentially very hemorrhagic. We know that these injuries that Dan sustained went into his chest. That's very well documented. And when that happens, you have something that occurs that's referred to as pleural effusion, which means if you have major organs, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a major organ, you can just clip a vessel, and guess what happens at that point in time? That open space around the lungs just begins to fill with blood. And there's nowhere for it to go. Remember, it's no longer in the vessels. You're bleeding out into this open space. So when she's doing compressions like this, there could be a squishy feeling. And even from bullet defects, you can have blood. If you can you imagine this being a student and you're doing chest compressions? Through the defects, you've got blood that's it's almost like a font that's coming up and spraying blood, not spraying in the sense of arterial spray. It's not that dynamic, but the area outside of the body is becoming super saturated with every compression that you do. Now, another explanation for this is that if, in fact, these rounds were to pass through any of the bony structures, when you begin to think about the sternum, which is the large flat bone that's right in the center of our chest, or the ribs to either side, those are going to become fractured as well, just by the impact of these rounds. That'll have kind of a good way to describe it is a squishiness to it too, because all of that area, as long as he is still living for a moment or two, becomes super infused with hemorrhage around that area. Those little areas under the skin are becoming hemorrhagic. So that'll lend itself to that as well. So it's a bloody mess. In the literal sense of that term, I feel so sorry for the student that had to endure this, because it was absolutely a horror show.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Meaningful Beauty, the famed skincare brand created by iconic supermodel Cindy Crawford. It's her secret to absolutely gorgeous skin. Meaningful Beauty makes powerful and effective skincare simple, and it's loved by millions of women. It's formulated for all ages and all skin tones and types, and it's designed to work as a complete skincare system, leaving your skin feeling soft, smooth, and nourished. I recommend starting with Cindy's full regimen, which contains all 5 of her best-selling products, including the amazing youth-activating Melon Serum. This next-generation serum has the power of melon leaf stem cell technology. It's melon leaf stem cells encapsulated for freshness and released onto the skin to support a visible reduction in the appearance of wrinkles. With thousands of glowing 5-star reviews, why not give it a try? Subscribe today and you can get the amazing Meaningful Beauty system for just $49.95. That includes our introductory 5-piece system, free gifts, free shipping, and a 60-day money-back guarantee. All of that available at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
We talk about this a lot in death investigation, particularly where homicide is involved. You begin to think about, who could have been angry enough, agitated enough in order to bring an end to somebody's life. And contrary to what you see in even popular media or in fictionalized novels, it's generally not some stranger in a dark alley. It's going to be those individuals that are in our immediate circle. And in this case, Dan Brophy's wife, Nancy, was arrested.
Yes, she was. In fact, she quickly became the only suspect in this murder. Police found evidence leading back to Nancy Brophy. And in fact, the first thing which was a strike against her was the title of her novel, How to Murder Your Husband. I would have to imagine doing what you do for a living, and me as well, being a journalist, one of the things that we both do is ask questions. When you throw a writer in with a forensics person, that can be a dangerous combination.
You're absolutely right about that. I'm going to confess something here. I'm going to confess one of my greatest fears. You don't find people doing this very often because it shows you being weak, but I'm going to confess one of my greatest fears. I've been involved in forensics and death investigation since I was a very young man, since I was essentially 20, 21 years old. It's the first time I ever walked in a morgue. And people are always curious. They're always curious. They always want to know because people are generally not around death. And for me, I inhabited the world of death for years and years trying to figure out what happened. And there are any number of times I've been called to speak in public. And of course, I do it on air a lot. And I would go to these writers' meetings. They would ask me to come in and speak, to crime writers, want to be, fictional crime writers and that sort of thing. And there's always that little thing in the back of my mind where I'm speaking to this crowd and they haven't been vetted. And generally they're there, for their purposes. They want to know about forensics and kind of how it all works and this sort of thing. But there was always that little thing in the back of my mind is, who exactly am I educating on this audience? Are these people here to try to learn about the mechanics of forensics and certainly the science of it and how they can create this beautiful narrative where they create some kind of mystery? Or do they want something else from me? Do they want to try to figure out how to get away with a perfect crime? So in answer to your question, yeah, it's something that has always kind of sat in the back of my mind and made me quite fearful many times. You kind of walk out of the room after you've talked to me and say, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But to that point, I have no evidence yet to indicate that I've been in any way implicated in any kind of homicide out there yet.
Well, Nancy Brophy's self-published romance, How to Murder Your Husband, essentially ended up not being admitted into trial. The judge ruled that it would be excluded, but there was lots of other evidence. There was a timeline that didn't seem to add up of where Nancy Brophy said she was to the surveillance video, Joe, of traffic cameras that showed Nancy Brophy's minivan in the streets around the Institute close to the time of the shooting. But she says she was nowhere near the Institute. So how did police go about putting all of these things together to come up with a timeline of how she could have done it?
Yeah, in this case, they lived obviously some distance away from the institution. And, there's always already one vehicle that's there, and that's Dan's vehicle that he had shown up early in the morning, to begin work. And you've got a very tight window here. You'd have to have intimate knowledge of the comings and goings, not only of Dan, but guess what other population? The students and then Dan's colleagues that are showing up to work. So when they saw her van, kind of circling in this area, when they went back and reviewed the CCTV information, it did not marry up with the times that she claimed she was not there. I mean, you've got a physical image of her driving about, moving around shortly after Dan had come into the location and began to set up for the day. And, we kind of talked about that. But, there were these other issues that had come up. She claimed that I think that she had still remained in bed when Dan had left the house. She had an awareness that he had left, apparently. But she contends that she was, in bed writing. That's, we've already talked about how she was a writer. And then there was the issue of feeding the chickens. They kept chickens on their property there, which is another kind of little aside relative to Dan and the world that he inhabited. Dan, I didn't even know this kind of thing existed. I guess I should have, but Dan was regarded as a master poultry preparer. And one of the things about that is you have to know how to slaughter chickens. And so they actually had chickens on property there that would be obviously to furnish eggs, but also to provide meat so that you could do dishes with these sorts of things. So all of that did not marry up with the police. And you have a suspect that is telling you something that does not marry up with what the police are sitting there. And I can see them all sitting around a monitor before they ever approach her about this. And they're establishing a timeline that's marrying up because, every one of these CCTV cameras, as it's being recorded, it's documenting that time over and over again, second by second. We're working in linear time. And if you go back and you begin to question a suspect in this particular case, you know that it is an empirical impossibility for her to have been in two places at one time. In this case, she apparently was riding around, scoping out the area, measuring the area for who may or may not be there. Was Dan there by himself? And it's that moment in time she apparently chose to strike.
Another very important piece of evidence that came into play here was money. Money always seems to be a top motivator from what we've seen covering cases for a very long time now. And what we find out is that Nancy Crampton Brophy had taken out life insurance policies on her husband's name. Now, in general, that's not, most wives and husbands have insurance policies on each other, but we find out that she took out 10 different life insurance policies in her husband's name that would give her, at his death, more than $1 million. So what we find out is that Nancy Brophy was in money trouble.
So many times we find out these cases are rooted in financial gain. And, as a financial investigator, if you bring somebody into the case that does forensic accounting, for instance, and has a real feel for numbers, particularly in the world of insurance and those sorts of things, they can run a balance sheet, essentially. That's kind of an oversimplistic way of putting this, but you have to understand, how much is your life actually valued at, and your properties. One of the reasons that you have an insurance policy is, you want to make sure that your loved ones are taken care of. But if you have, like, for instance, outstanding debts, particularly the biggest one in our life is generally our mortgage, do you have sufficient amount of funds to cover that? Say one lump sum that's given to you and you can cover it. But this far exceeded what their balance sheet as a couple belied. It was, this is so far over the top that you have to begin to understand that she's attempting to pay off debt. And the sad part about it is that because she put together these insurance policies, and I think you had mentioned that there were upwards of 10 that she had taken off, that's a huge red flag for investigators. Now, like you said, it doesn't necessarily make you guilty of homicide, but it is a circumstantial element. And a lot of this case is circumstantial, as we'll get to. It's a circumstantial element that goes in to put together this entire piece that we're looking about the life that they lived. And that's what this is all about when you begin to think, we talk about the forensics of it relative to the gunshot wounds and the condition of the scene, but what are those factors leading up to it? What's the motivation behind ending Dan's life?
So we've laid out an investigation here. We have a timeline that doesn't match. We have a computer forensics timeline. We have money difficulties. And then we come down to the last piece of circumstantial evidence, and that is a gun.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Now I'd like to introduce you to Meaningful Beauty, the famed skincare brand created by iconic supermodel Cindy Crawford. It's her secret to absolutely gorgeous skin. Meaningful Beauty makes powerful and effective skincare simple, and it's loved by millions of women. It's formulated for all ages and all skin tones and types, and it's designed to work as a complete skincare system, leaving your skin feeling soft, smooth, and nourished. I recommend starting with Cindy's full regimen, which contains all 5 of her best-selling products, including the amazing youth-activating melon serum. This next generation serum has the power of melon leaf stem cell technology. It's melon leaf stem cells encapsulated for freshness and released onto the skin to support a visible reduction in the appearance of wrinkles. With thousands of glowing 5-star reviews, why not give it a try? Subscribe today and you can get the amazing Meaningful Beauty system for just $49.95. That includes our introductory 5-piece system, free gifts, free shipping, and a 60-day money-back guarantee. All of that available at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have I asked my HVAC guy I found on Angie.com to change my grandpa's trachea tube? Because I was so amazed by how quickly he replaced our air ducts. I knew I could trust him to change Pop-Pop's tube while I was on vacation.
Make it quick, young man.
Aw, see? Pop-Pop trusts you.
I think we should call a doctor.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Are you a fraud-paying American? It's a fact that 1 in 4 honest, hard-working, tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity theft. With LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, though, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, and get you your money back. Last year, the IRS flagged over $16 billion in refunds for identity fraud. That's billions of dollars that could come from your salary, overtime, or second job. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second for your personal information and alerts you to threats you could easily miss on your own. And if your information does fall into the wrong hands, only LifeLock has U.S.-based restoration specialists who are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
One of the biggest elements that comes about in a homicide is, I would imagine, for the perpetrators, they have to decide how they're going to go about it. And I'm not talking about timing. I'm not talking about are they going to be able to have access to their target. I'm talking about how are they going to go about it? How are they going to bring about the end of somebody's life? What tool are they going to use? And we cover a lot of things here. We talk about blunt force injuries. We talk about sharp force injuries. We talk about poisoning sometimes. But in this case, there was a very unique weapon that was involved in this case. The Glock 17 and the Glock 19 and a ghost gun.
Lots of things to uncover there, Joe, but we're going to start back with the computer. In that Nancy Crampton Brophy researched guns online, and then she purchased a gun at a gun show. Now, her attorneys explained that Brophy was working on a book about a woman who basically got revenge on an abusive partner by killing him with a gun assembled from pieces bought online. And in order to make her story believable, Nancy Brophy had to be able to do this and understand how to do this to make her story credible. First off, Joe, how do you do that? Why do you do that? And then we'll get into a ghost gun.
You know, one of the things that we look for in forensics are what we refer to as ballistic signatures. And that is, and if our listeners would just, think about those things that make us unique. It's a principle in forensics that we refer to as individualization. And this goes to the implements that are used in perpetration of a homicide. We begin to think about fingerprints. We begin to think about pattern injuries that come about as being struck with some kind of blunt force object like a hammer. In this case, we're talking about firearms. This ballistic fingerprint that comes down the line every barrel, if you will, every firing pin, every extractor on a weapon leaves behind a definitive signature on either an expended casing, which is in a semi-automatic weapon. It's that soft metal casing that is ejected out of the port that's left behind by the extractor marks. And of course, as the projectile is traveling down the barrel, it kind of expands out in the barrel because of the heat and the explosion that takes place, that little miniature explosion, and it expands out into what are referred to as the lands and grooves, which are the spiraling features inside of the barrel that are actually manufactured in there. And the spiraling creates stability in the projectile. It also maintains power. Years ago you had muskets that weren't rifled. Rifling, these lands and grooves, maintain that energy. So you have much more power upon delivery as it exits. But the trade-off with this is that those spirals in there are unique to individual weapons. And I'll give you an example. If we have a weapon that comes from manufacturer A, and it's, say, a 9mm, and they make, say, 300 weapons in a run, guess what? Each ballistic signature of that 300, even though they're manufactured at the same time, is going to be unique to that weapon. And much more so after those weapons make their way out into the hands of individuals that purchase them. That signature becomes more unique, and it's dependent upon how well you take care of the weapon, if you clean it, what type of ammunition you're pushing through it, and also just day-to-day bumping around, and that can impact the ballistic signature that's left behind. So every weapon is unique, and that's one of the things that we look for when we recover projectiles from bodies, or say that are embedded, say that have passed through a body and they embed themselves into walls or floors. We go in there and carefully extract those projectiles so that we can look at the impressions that are left along the shaft of this projectile and test fire it through the suspected weapon and see if those lands and grooves match up. Now, there's one more piece that I didn't talk about here. Something else that is unique to a weapon is the firing pin impression. And that is, it almost looks like a nail if you think about a firing pin and you're talking about the tip of it as the weapon is charged essentially in order to fire, kind of cocked, if you will. The weapon is cocked and that firing pin slams forward. On the base of every one of these bullets, intact ammunition, there is what's called a primer cap that's at the base. It's right in the center. It looks like a bullseye. And microscopically, did you know that you can actually marry up the tip of a firing pin to the strike point in the center of that primer cap? And it is unique to that firing pin. So you've got several points along the way where you can match these things up.
But is that still possible, given the fact that Nancy Brophy bought multiple interchangeable parts for this gun?
Well, that's the problem. If you buy, in this case, there was a Glock, which is a particular manufacturer, and people hear about it in the media all the time and in entertainment. You hear about a Glock weapon, which is an Austrian-made weapon. She had a Glock 17 and she had a Glock 19. Now, they're both 9mm weapons, which is the type of ammunition that's used. And so the interesting thing about these two weapons is that you can, even though they're different models, the 17 is actually longer than the 19. You can actually use parts from the 17 in the 19 and kind of vice versa on a limited basis. However, if you go out independently after having purchased these two factory-made weapons, you get into this weird world that's referred to as the ghost gun environment. And, for folks that don't understand what a ghost gun is, this is an aftermarket adaptation that you can go out and purchase Some people refer to them as homemade guns, but they're available out there. They've been available for years and years. And let me kind of tell you how this works. If you think about a semi-automatic weapon, such as in the Glock 17, it has a slide on top of it. And you may have seen this in movies where people will charge the weapon by pulling the slide back, and then it slams forward. Well, when you pull that slide back, what you're doing is in a very simplistic way. I'll just use this because the Glock doesn't have a hammer, like an external hammer. You're essentially cocking that weapon. Now, what happens is if you buy a ghost gun, and in this case, we're talking about a barrel and a slide, you take the manufactured barrel and slide off of the weapon. Okay, you put it aside. And you take your ghost gun, which fits the same frame, and you slide it on top. And remember how I talked about earlier that these barrels create unique signatures, okay? Unique signatures that are unique to those particular barrels. Well, when you pump around through that thing, you take the slide off of it, you take the barrel off of it, which are the ghost gun, if you will, and you put the factory-made slide and barrel back on it. No one's going to be any the wiser. You take the ghost gun parts, and I don't know, I've been to Portland. Portland's right by the Pacific Ocean. You take that thing and you throw it out there as far as you can, because at this point, when the ballistic examination was done on both the 17 and the 19, they couldn't tie it back to either one of those barrels. And this all comes down to digital forensics, because the police believe that Nancy went on eBay, of all places, and purchased a ghost gun.
So this brings us back to that firing pin that you were talking about just a moment ago, Joe. They were not able to match that strike.
Yeah, they're not. And this is what's, and I can only imagine for firearms examiners, some people refer to them as ballistic scientists and firearms examination. I can only imagine their frustration because they've got two casings. Remember, Dan was shot twice. His injuries were essentially in the chest, okay, and in the back. And here's a little something that people might not know that don't deal in the world of anatomy the way I do. We have both an anterior chest and a posterior chest. Physicians, when they're doing an examination and autopsy, they generally don't say back. They'll say posterior chest, because they all kind of communicate with one another. So for our purposes here, we'll say he was shot in the anterior and posterior chest. He had 2 rounds that entered his body. They actually recovered the spent casings. And can you imagine the frustration that when they get there and they recover these casings, the police are probably thinking, oh, wow, we've recovered the casings. The perpetrator, the person that perpetrated this crime, didn't stay around long enough to collect them, and then they ride off into the sunset. No, they left them behind. That's a big piece of evidence, and it's something that when you're an investigator and you're working on unsolved homicide, that's one box you can tick automatically, say, oh my gosh, we've got recovered casings at the scene. That means that if we can get our hands on a suspected weapon, we can pair that up, because we're looking at extraction marks, which when that slide goes back in the process of firing, there's these extractors that pull these rounds out, or pull the spent casing out, and it ejects it. And they leave these little striations on the side of the casing. And striations is just a fancy term for little linear marks that are on there, but they are unique to a particular weapon. Okay. That is extractors contained within that slide. They also couldn't match up the firing pin in this case, again, contained within this slide. And when you look at the base of that bullet right there on that primer cap, and you look at it microscopically, when you, for people that are not familiar with microscopes, and, you know, when you do comparison microscopes in the ballistic lab, you begin to look down the ocular viewer, and you can see down the long axis, and you're looking at that dented primer cap, and it has features like the moon that are unique that are unique to that particular event. And can you imagine they're test firing it with similar ammunition and they're not generating the same thing every time? So their frustration is really high. So at the close, all they could do is put this together circumstantially. Now, the interesting thing about a Glock weapon is that out of all the other weapons that are out there, Glocks are unique. And particularly from years back, depending upon what generation of Glock you bought, they're the first weapon. A lot of people don't know this. They're the first weapon that is actually formed out of a plastic mold, and they're made with polymers, which makes them very, very light. Their characteristics are unique. So when you're looking at general classification as a ballistic scientist and you're examining this thing, you can generally categorize the extraction marks. You can generally categorize the rifling marks that are left behind on a projectile and even the firing pin marks and say, okay, I might not know which Glock this came from, but I do know it came from a Glock as opposed to a Smith & Wesson or a Ruger or HK or a Sig Sauer or whatever you're looking at. I know that this came from a Glock, but they just couldn't match it up to a specific one.
How technically apt do you need to be able to assemble these gun parts to make a working gun? We know that Nancy Brophy bought ghost gun parts online, and then she also bought a slide and barrel to fit the Glock that she already had. So how much knowledge do you need to be able to make this a working gun?
I'll sum this up by making this one statement. Do you have a computer and do you have access to YouTube? That's how simple it is. And with about a 15-minute tutorial, you can learn how to break down. There are whole categories within YouTube that teach you how to clean a Glock weapon. Any number of the platforms that are out there that Glock has created, you can go and put in that particular type of Glock. And part of cleaning a weapon is you have to break the weapon down. Okay. So within about 15 minutes, you can change it in and out. And I'm sure that, when she's planning this thing, she's saying Eureka, because she bought this ghost gun, if you will, and she already has these two other platforms. And she looks at this thing and she says, okay, well, everything's riding on this. All her quote unquote research is riding on this. She's watched a YouTube video. She sat there, she disassembles the manufacturer made weapon, grabs those ghost elements, plops it on there, charges the weapon, and she looks at it and she can dry fire it. And she knows right then that her task is accomplished. And all it takes now is and I don't know that she did this, but all it would take now is for her to go to a firing range or somewhere out in the wilderness and pop off a few rounds to get comfortable with this thing, just to make sure that it works, just so that she has maybe a fail safe in place. Because I don't know if she may have shown up with a backup weapon. Remember, she had 2 Glocks. But it's very easy to do. It's not like she has to be even a gunsmith in order to do this. I think that anybody that has access to the internet could make this happen very, very easily. And I got to tell you, it's a unique approach on her part to alibi herself by saying that this was part of research. Because again, back to what I said earlier about being fearful who's out in the audience, it terrifies me.
The slide and barrel that Nancy Brophy bought online were never recovered. So that basically means that there's no way to make an identical match of the weapon that killed Dan Brophy.
Right you are about that. And I would think that if her case were to come up if her case were ever to come up on appeal, one of the major points of appeal could potentially be the circumstantial nature of the ballistics with this, because there was no way that they could put that weapon into her hand, firing that weapon and generating those unique markings on those projectiles that brought Dan's life to an end. I think that for me, that could be a major point of contention on the part of her defense team if they choose to move forward with an appeal in her particular case. I think that would make it unique. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert. Presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Running my small business was like playing basketball 5-on-1, and I was the one. Now, QuickBooks gives me access to a team of AI agents and trusted experts for the assists I need. Nothing but net.
Outdo it with Intuit QuickBooks. Feature availability varies by product.
Are you a fraud-paying American? 1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity fraud. With LifeLock, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Last year, billions in refunds were stolen. Could be from your salary, overtime, or second job. Gone. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim, because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
It never happens at a good time. The pipe bursts at midnight. The heater quits on the coldest night. Suddenly, you're overwhelmed. That's when HomeServe is here. For $4.99 a month, you're never alone. Just call their 24/7 hotline and a local pro is on the way. Trusted by millions, HomeServe delivers peace of mind when you need it most. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Picture chicken nuggets in your head. Okay, now forget them. Because Taco Bell's crispy chicken nuggets are here. And they're nothing like the nuggets you know. All white meat chicken, coated in tortilla chips for that signature Taco Bell crunch. A nugget like that calls for a sauce that can keep up. Introducing Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. The iconic ranch you love, fired up with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. Bold meets bolder. Ranch meets Diablo, and it works. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell, a brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.